So the lecture, as I was doing it, I was planning on doing things chronologically, and the problem with Steichen is he had a habit of going back and forth between France and the US, so it became a little problematic. So I'm doing it by groupings. I'm going to try to spend about 30 seconds per slides because I have about 90. And I'm going to do some bullet points. I'm going to read the bullet points from the computer because it's much faster. And then you'll see a lot more illustrations as we go in. So this is the title of the lecture. Here we go. So in Exaltation of Flowers are 3 panels out of 7 that were commissioned by the Meyer family for their upcoming home. It was supposed to be the foyer, the big entrance hall. Was never set up. So these are 3. I haven't seen the last 4. When I'll take you later on, you'll be very surprised at the scale. It's very large and beautiful. So anyone who looks at this, and you look at the dates, they were painted between 1910 to 1913. You already can feel a very strong Art Deco feel to it. And this is something I want to emphasize. World War I delayed a bunch of art movements that were already starting to show their faces in the 1895, 1902, and so forth. And when it blocked everything, you can already see there is a very strong deco quality. So to prove so, these were the images, or are the images on the website. So I put a little bit of red around them. So as I put them in the lecture, you will see them, they'll pop up. Again, it's a little bit of a span of what Steichen is about. Portraitist, did a lot of self-portrait because every artist had to do them, but he would always change them. He had a fascination for flowers and nature, and you will see 1901, very early landscape versus 1935, Lily Pond in Montquisco with little shoes around. This could pass easily as a fashion photography piece. It's quite beautiful. So here we go. So anyone who has a little background in art history or likes to go to the Winter Antique Show or TEFAF and so forth, you will pick up a bunch of things just by looking at this. Obviously, there's a reference to the Japanese screens, especially the 18th century one when the background was gold leaf. It didn't last very long, but you can see the reference, so Orientalism. I put the portrait, the piece by Ingres of La Source, The Spring, which was considered in the 19th century as the most perfect academic painting. He spent, as you can see, like a good 30 years finishing it. And if you look at it, neoclassicism, also a caryatide, if you look back to ancient Greece, a little bit of everything. So you can see some of the references already. And I'm friendly with the antique jewelry shop on Park and 58th Street, James Robinson. So I called them and said, hey, do you have anything with Egyptian something? But I'd like before 1910. And they're like, don't worry about it. So this is one of the brooch they sent me. And the reason I insisted on having this is because this little Egyptian revival element, you can see is being played with. And we always assume that Egyptomania kicked in really with Tutankhamun, but not at all. Since Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, it never died off. It was always around, like all over furnishings, jewelry, and so forth for the 19th century, but in very small doses. So here we go. So who is Edward Steichen and why is he so famous? That's the big question. Steichen, fairly handsome man, very chic. You can see 3 portraits, self-portraits, 1902, he was very young still, 1917, before the war, 1929, during that time he's working at Condé Nast Publications. And we'll talk about it later on. This was really a beautiful marriage between art and commerce. He had complained to a friend, I'm sick of being poor, so he took the job and also did some advertising on the side. So this is a very thoughtful Mr. Steichen. The year he quits Condé Nast Publication, 37. And then a young portrait that he had made of himself as the young tycoon. So he was also playing with it. Keep in mind that some of the earlier photo, the exposure is very long. We're not talking 5 seconds. You can't really move too much, especially with landscape, could be 45 minutes, an hour and a half. to get the lights to come in. So here we go. So Mr. Steichen was born in Luxembourg and died in Connecticut, but lived mostly when he was in the US in New York City. But when he was young, the family left Luxembourg, moved to Michigan, Hancock, Michigan, stayed there for 8 years, and then went across to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he basically did his schooling. So after schooling, he went back and forth between the US and France, Paris itself, and Voulangey, where he had a little house, which was about an hour or 45-minute drive today, east of Paris. I'm personally, from where I'm from, is a little more south of that, so it's really not very far. So, and then you can see the tri-state area. So here we're gonna go. So I'm gonna be reading because I went, oh no, I can read that, that's fine. So while attending school, the young Steichen showed advanced artistic capability that the teachers started talking to the mother about. They said, you know, he's special, you need to do something about it. And surprisingly, the mother not only agreed with it, she pushed it. So at some point she said, okay, we're gonna take you out of the school. You're 14 years old, 15. And he started an internship with a lithograph company, the American Fine Art Company in Milwaukee. And he basically taught himself while doing this how to sketch, how to paint, how to draw properly. So he was really autodidact, a self-made little creative genius. You know, he was always trying a little bit of everything and see what would work for him. And within a couple years, he purchased a second-hand Kodak 50 exposure camera box, which is on occasion called the kind of like the spy box or investigator ones. They were fairly large, not very practical. So he bought it in '95, and he basically taught himself how to properly take a photo. So portraiture, landscape, how do you develop the film, the new chemistry. So he was always learning something new. So the process of the young Steichen style was soft focus, which was very, very in demand at the period, which is also referred to as pictorial style. So think of very beautiful, moody landscapes. You may have a little bit of fog coming up and so forth. This is the kind of thing that people liked. And they were also coincidentally very similar to paintings being done slightly before that. So there's a certain artistic style that's favored. So the genesis of Steichen's style is already somewhat present as a child. He looked at photography as eye art. He said there's no difference with that and a painting. It's beautiful. The aesthetic blurring of painting and photography is continuous through his life. So even when he does a fashion shoot, the composition is probably more similar to a painting than it would be to a traditional photograph, and you will see it always stays in. Mastery of the process, he really, really went out of his way to learn the latest developing with there's like the platinum printing system, the gum bicarbonate, and so forth. I mean, very complex things. So he understood the chemistry, understood the technology. Painterly composition was his thing. Moody, when he was younger, was really the forefront, and afterwards he simplified it with a slightly more deco approach, which parallels the Hollywood films technique with bright lights and so forth. Strong graphic sensibility, artistic approach to subject matter, always very respectful of the subject. Could be a flower, could be a rock or a person. There's always something quite attractive about it. Portraiture is extremely important for him. Paid the bills for a very long time, back and forth. And curiosity is in environment. He was always looking at something else. So a very, very open-minded man. I was able to find an advertisement with 4 types of Kodak camera ranging from 1994 and 97. As you can see, they're not that small. They're fairly large. You don't really walk around and take a photo very quickly. You could, but it would be blurry. So once you take a photo and you have a beautiful light going in, the exposure is in the minutes that go closer to the hour. It would take a very long time. So the first one is the setup. So photo was becoming fairly popular, and you started having photography contests. and people would send a submission, and Mr. Steichen, fairly young, decided to do so. So Philadelphia had a photographic salon at the Academy in '98. Alfred Stieglitz showed some of his work. He was not the judge, though. Clarence Hudson White was the judge the following year. The two men are judges at the Chicago Art Institute, where the young Steichen sends a bunch of entries, and most of all, except a few, everything was accepted. So he was very, very surprised. And he wanted to meet Stieglitz, but couldn't meet him yet. So in 1900, the young Stieglitz decided, I have to go to Paris to learn to be a real artist. I suspect, I didn't see any references, but he must have been completely fluent in French, being from Luxembourg, the family. And then both parents have French first names, so I guess they were more French than German. So he wanted to see the Expo, 1900 Expo Universelle, which gave Paris the name of the City of Light. You know, like they set up a little town with the latest art, new technologies, new everything, but it's very attractive. And usually after a few years, it's dismantled and disappears. That's it. And I will show you something later on that lasted 25 years, which would be interesting. So, which is the Auguste Rodin's Pavillon de l'Alma, was his little pavilion where he had all of his cast. That stayed until 1925 when it was torn down because they did the new exhibit, Exposition des Arts Décoratifs, which coined the term Art Déco. So art décoratif, you know, that thing. So there's also going to be a lot of relationship between Steichen, Stieglitz, Steichens, Hoda. We're going to look at them in little groupings. And luckily for him, he decided when he was in New York on his way to France to stop and try to meet Stieglitz. And Stieglitz actually said, yes, come up, I'll see you. So before, this is the Pavillon de l'Alma where for 25 years, Rodin showed some of his plaster casts. Most of the casts are now at the Muse Rodin. And if you want to go to the Muse Rodin's website, it is very interesting because they break it down very easily. And it's equally in French and in English. So you can get all the stuff translated for you. It's going to be very easy. So this actually is one of the things that really changed Steichen's life on some level, his relationship to Rodin. So here we go. So once in New York, Steichen went down to see Stieglitz, who happened to be the vice president and editor of the Camera Note magazine, which was part of the Camera Club of the US or New York, you know, depending on how you want to see it. So Stieglitz was the photographer that everybody wanted to talk to. He had already shifted the direction of the fine arts, putting photography on a pedestal along with other things, and basically was really promoting photography as a new type of fine art. So what happened is Stieglitz showed some of his photos. Steichen showed some photos to Stieglitz, who actually chose three, one self-portrait and two landscapes, and paid $5 each for the photograph. So the young Steichen was completely surprised and admitted after the sale, he said, you know, I've never sold anything for more than 50 cents. So that's a big deal. And then he left for England to see Mr. White, who had started a photography school. So we're not going to talk about him. But I had to put the name of the boat because the SS Champagne is just too fabulous. I mean, when I saw this, I was like, I couldn't find a photo though, so that was bad. So here we go. So this is actually the self-portrait that Stieglitz purchased. And this is one of the cover of Camera Note magazine. I forgot to ask a friend of mine who works at the New York Public Library, you know, on Fifth Avenue between 40 and 42. I think they have a full run. They definitely have some, but I don't know if the run is complete. So this is a $5 bill during the period. This is the 1875 design. There were also a bunch of banknotes, but I wanted people to see how a $5 bill looked back in the day. So this is one of the more average ones. By the 1920s, it looks a lot more like the ones we're used to today. Like they've already simplified it. I kind of like this one too. And the banknotes were even more fabulous. They have like Indian chiefs and animals. I mean, they were so chic, you know, so great. So here we go. So we're going to go a little more with these, and afterwards we're going to see more art. So during his visit to Paris in 1900, the young Steichen befriended a bunch of artists that were part of the group of Montparnasse. If you've been to Paris, Montparnasse is the only place that has this hideous black tower that was created in the 70s, which Macron is having stripped completely for the Olympics. And he said it has to be bright and full of plants. So they're going to design some things. There may even be an ice rink and a restaurant on top at some point. It's going to be way more attractive than it is now. So and in order to build it, they destroyed an entire zone, just like they did with Lincoln Center. They wiped out a big zone to build something else. So the group of artists were very beneficial to Steichen in that they opened his mind and agreed with him on many things. They say art is art, you know, there's different techniques, we can do a lot of different things. So some were French, some were foreigners that moved to Paris to study, and everyone got along quite well. So the thing was, Steichen would live between New York and France over 22 years, dozens of times. He would go back and forth. Like he was always moving back and forth. So I couldn't really do a chronology because it would have gotten too chaotic. So I'm doing it by groupings. So when Steichen was in France, he started early on dropping painting for photography. And he befriended some of the people from the Photo Club de Paris, which was a very advanced camera photography group. And what they would promote was this finish, the gum bichromate process. And at the same time, you would also have one with platinum. And sometimes they would do combinations of the two. I'm not familiar with the chemistry, so I can't tell you. So I think sometimes it's different levels of printing that you would do. And it would give a much more painterly quality. There's more depth because everything is in black and white. So depending on the paper you use, it could give you more depth. So Steichen quickly acquired a reputation when he was in Paris, again, as a very good portraitist. So he would photograph some of the artists, some writers that he met as well, and some society people. And this is always going to come back, the portraits. So Steichen and Hoda, art and poetry. I don't know if you know much about Rodin. He was a little grumpy. He was not the nicest man. I mean, he could be very nice, but he was very, he could be a little rough. And commissions that were made by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they even have notes when he would write to the director, like beautiful handwriting about like, oh, I'm going to do the sculpture. It's going to be like this. I hope you like it. So sometimes when they have exhibit, they will pull them out. So beautiful handwriting, very poetic the way he wrote. His behavior, when you heard stuff, was much more rough. So he was kind of an interesting character. So there was a very strong mutual respect between the two men, and they remained very, very close friends until Rodin died. So they were very, very close. So 1901, the Norwegian Impressionist painter Fritz Tullow, very, very beautiful paintings. You could say it's a little bit Fauvist, for the French taste. I find it very attractive. Not at all what I was expecting. He knew Rodin, and he said, you need to meet him. So he met the connection between the two men. They got along famously, so they were very happy. 1906, already, Steichen had already gone back to the US, come back to France. And this time came up with his family. He happened to be married 3 times. I didn't really go into the details and divorces and stuff. So some of the details may actually make sense within a new marriage and so forth when you get a job with Condé Nast Publications. So basically until World War I, he was basically doing the back and forth with the US. And this is the thing that made me laugh when I saw it. So Rodin became the godfather of his second child, his daughter Kate, whose middle name is Rodina, in homage to Rodin. So when I saw this, I was like, wow, they were really close. Yeah. So they were family, basically. But, that's an interesting one. So this is also portraiture, the old school painting. There's a little bit of psychology and respect in everything you will see in Steichen. This is a very interesting. So it's a photograph of Rodin in front of the monument to Victor Hugo, in plaster, so it's not faded. though the thinker is already a cast bronze. The composition together, the exposure must have been fairly long as well, but you were able to see so many depths and sculpture. So it could easily be a painting, but it is a photograph. This is part of their collection. Again, so this landscape must have taken at least an hour of exposure because you could see all the ripple, the reflection on the water, and so forth. So at one point, with the when the focus is very, very set, it will absorb light very slowly, and this is why you have such a clear stuff. And if we were to move it back maybe 25 years and say it's an old painting, you completely would believe it. So this is where something interesting comes in. So this is the monument of Honoré de Balzac that caused a huge scandal. But this is a photograph by Steichen that was done at night, and it was published in camera work. So again, the relationship between Steichen and Stieglitz and camera work, very, very close. When he was in France, he would still send stuff. So here we go. So when Steichen was still fairly young, he was studying his lithography. In 1898, he had read in a newspaper about a scandal happening in France about the sculptor Auguste Rodin. He was just very fascinated by it. So, and this is completely true. Like there's huge amounts of documentation. So this was happening in France, in England, in the US, like all over the place. Everyone was fascinated because Rodin was so famous. So Rodin had been approached by la Société des gens de lettres, a society of people of letters, very, very high academic writers, who had decided that they wanted a public sculpture of Honoré de Balzac and just pay for it and do it. So Rodin did his thing. He came up with like a cast and so forth. And when the Société saw it, they were like, they didn't just refuse it, they rejected it, which means we're not paying for it. Like, get rid of that thing. So this is when the hoopla happened. So the abstracted appearance of Balzac displeased the society. They just did not want to put any dollar on it. But in the fall of 1908, Rodin asked Steichen, he said, is there any way you could photograph it? Because we just took the plaster cast outside. And he's like, sure. And he did during the day, but it just didn't work very well. And Rodin said, you mentioned nighttime. Can we do it at moonlight? Full moon, we could do something. Steichen did. And so this is just a technique you see where you have a very long exposure that gets the light in. So this is not a 10-minute shot. This is like 45 minutes, an hour or more. So this is what happened when you do it in the middle of the night with moonlight. It is stunning. I mean, it really is gorgeous. And you could see the respect of Rodin to Balzac when he basically refers, you're going to make people understand my sculpture, but they are like, your photos are like Christ walking in a desert. So, I mean, this is not, a very soft compliment. It's very, very heartfelt. So now we're going to go back to Stieglitz, because Stieglitz is the American connection, American photography, American publication, and Stieglitz always continue to promote photography as a high art in the US. Depending on what you read, they would mention that the man kind of shifted. No, they shifted artistically, but they remained very good friends. And this is a photo from 1946 by Dorothy Norman, sorry. And as you can see, they're still buds, like there's no issues, like there's no problem. But one went fashion, one went much more like fine art sculpture. So by 1902, Steichen decided to return to New York and launch his professional photography career as a portraitist because he had a talent for it. He made people look beautiful, very distinguished, but also very human. And people were willing to pay, the price for it. So once in town, he rented a studio at 291 Fifth Avenue, which no longer exists. We'll show you a photo of it. It's a couple blocks below where Koreatown is on 32, on 5th. I think 3 townhouses or 4 were taken down for a bigger building. I think in 14 or 15 or something like that. So Stieglitz, he's really where it becomes very important. He created the photo secession, which was a group, basically an organization that would promote photography and photographers. And it's American photography and American photographers. And the US really owes Stieglitz like a very big thank you, because he pushed it when it was still considered a little unusual. So what's interesting about this is the magazine itself lasted about 15 years and would be extremely influential with other institutions from Chicago, Oklahoma. So every museum were aware of it, and people would start collecting based on the people who were in it. If you ever see this photograph by accident in a thrift shop or a bookshop, please buy it. Maybe about 25 years ago, one sold for $3 million. Yeah, and if you see, it's the Flatiron Building. So this is actually 1904, and it's in essence the concept of the modern New York, but the modern New York is really after the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building. This was the first. Basically, the reason it's a skyscraper is because the infrastructure is metal, and the stones and bricks are put on the outside. So it can go very, very high. This photo is considered to be an ode because during that period, women are wearing corsets. You still have carriages. Now you have a skyscraper. So it's very modern. And if you look at the composition with the branch and so forth on Fifth, it's a painting, but it is a photograph. And this blurring of the two medium is really something that Steichen has always done. Again, fairly long exposure, I presume. Not 20 minutes, but probably a few minutes. So here we go. So the professional relationship between Stieglitz and Steichen showed a mutual artistic respect and professional admiration. And the two men worked very closely on camera work. But this is where it gets like, Stieglitz was generally very, very fond of the artwork that Steichen was coming up with. So look at this. So over 15 years and 50 issues, Steichen was the one that was the most shown. 65 photographs, 3 paintings, over 15 issues. On April 1906, a special Steichen supplement was added to it. And then in 13, an entire Steichen issue. So Steichen was really well observed by other photographers, artists and photographers. So in 1905, this is when the whole thing kicks in. Steichen came back to the US, opens a little studio at 291 Fifth Avenue, and basically starts acquiring the next little studios that were next to it, so he has more space. And then he said, you know, I'm going to be moving out. Why don't you take it over? And you were always talking about doing a gallery. Take it over, but not no problem. So camera work and so forth came back in it. So this is the building where it was initially, as you can tell, very narrow, only 3 windows per building. So they took a bunch and now it's gone. This is another kind of work that would show you what was going on in 1904. Very painterly, very pictorial, quite romantic. But this detail of light, very, very difficult to create. So here we go. So the space where Steichen initially had his photo studio was turned into the little galleries of the photo secession, which became later on known as 291, because that was the address. And the first exhibit that the Stieglitz did had 11 Steichen photographs. The gallery introduced the work of new American artists, and this is where it becomes very interesting. Alfred Moore, John Marin, Martin Hartley, then you have other ones such as Arthur Dove, Max Weber, you know, other people. Those are all the people who were initially with the MoMA collection. So they were really the first base of very new American artists. And all of them more or less dabbled a little bit in photography. Most of them were painters, but you know, they didn't really care. Everyone did a little bit of everything. So Steichen, while in France, became friendly with, acquainted and friendly with also people such as Pablo Picasso, Auguste Rodin, Henri Matisse, and Paul Cézanne, which was already very old, and would send information and little essays and so forth to Stieglitz to put in camera work. So the Gallery of the Photo Secession was the first one in the US to introduce the work of these artists. until 1913 when the Armory Show happened. I'm sure you've heard of the Armory Show. It was a huge, not a scandal, but in a positive one. Overnight, American audiences were introduced to 5 or 6 new art movements that they had no idea existed. So it changed everything. And this is the button you would get when you would get in. So I found one online, so I was very happy about it. I had a little problem with the different computers, so it pops things up. So, but the Armory Show lasted very shortly. I mean, it wasn't long. It is the Park Avenue Armory in the 20s on Lexington. It's not occasionally used nowadays for fashion shows, but there's not much going on there anymore. But this is the amount of stuff that was shown. So you had over 300 avant-garde European and American artists put together with 1,300 items of art. So it could be sculpture, art, or decorative elements. And if you look very closely, at the corner over there, you can see Brancusi. So you have at the same time the Dadaists, the Surrealists, the some of the Fauvists as well, the Impressionists, Expressionists. Everything was shown in one roof. And American art took an entirely different direction after that. So Steichen and the military, this is a little break in between, and then we're just doing pure fashion, so it's going to be more fun. So Steichen was very American, even though he was born in Luxembourg. And he was in France when basically the war was about to happen, so moved back to the US, enlisted at 38. So keep that in mind. So look at the camera he has, it's already changing. World War I was the first modern, as you call it, war in a sense that you had tanks, airplanes, cars, still horses with soldiers and swords, which is very odd. Submarines, we should deal with them already, and steamboats. So you had a bit of everything. Like it was really a very different war. So as I said, he joined the army in 1914. Initially, he should have been rejected. He was 8 years too old. But because of his photography, they were like, you know what? We could probably use you because we need photography nowadays because it's a new type of war. So he was a new recruit. He was hired by the Army Expeditionary Forces. While he was there, he started working with Major James Barnes, who is the one who really pushed for Aryan surveillance. So you would take photographs of fields like every day or once a week, so you could see how things change, damages, and so forth. And by the end of the war, he was a lieutenant colonel in the army. But here we go. So this Steichen is in Paris with some of his military friends, 1918, right around when the war was over. Then you could see like the way they were flying over the border between France, Belgium, as well as Luxembourg. This is where the Germans were really pushing in, and that was a bloodbath. This area was really atrocious. So this is an album that Steichen made and put some notes, and these are all photos, either by him or his regiment. And you could see how modern they look. This is like between 1914 and 1918. So you can see that this is Tours. These little holes are actually mine explosions. So you can see how bloody the place was. And this album happens to be in the possession of the Art Institute of Chicago. They own the entire thing. So they went there at some point and then they never left. So World War II kicks in. He had retired from Condé Nast Publications and he re-enlisted himself. Actually, no, they called him and they said, we want you in the office. And by World War II, Hollywood had changed completely, new type of cameras, new type of lighting. Steichen was commissioned as a lieutenant commander in the Navy Reserve. And he was asked to actually help develop a full-fledged division of military photographers. So think of Hiroshima and so forth. There was big layers of that in the war. Like they wanted people to be able to chronicle it, but also show like the bravery and so forth. So the brave soldier. So by the time he retired, he stopped 1945 in the war, 4,000 men were under him as photographers. I mean, he's a very busy man. He was captain by then, and he developed 2 exhibits that were shown at the Museum of Modern Art, which is like the first inkling of him going back, Road to Victory and Power in the Pacific. And he also, and this was last minute, I had no idea about this, he basically did a documentary called The Fighting Lady, which won an Oscar. And this is the poster for it. And it's part of the Smithsonian collection and so forth. So here we go. So this is 1900 and about 1922, 23. This is where the transatlantic artistic cross-pollination really metamorphoses in the development of Steichen's art form. So this is a quote by Steichen. As he said, I believe that art is cosmopolitan and that one should touch all points, which he always has been more into painting, photography, a bit of everything. I hate specialism. I hate that is the ruin of art, which is completely correct, but this is a very French thinking in many ways for some of the artists. So since his first visit to in France, Paris, 1900, he went back and forth and had a group of friends. So he had a really nice little colony of another family, if you want, there that were very beneficial for his artwork. And he started shifting from this moody type of landscaping to a slightly more crisp way of photography. Times were moving on. So you could see the war was kind of like the finish. His friendship with Rodin also introduced him to entire groups of critics and so forth. So he was very, very well versed artistically, like not only as an artist, but also he understood the philosophical points of it, a little bit of everything. So he was a very, very well-learned man. So in 1906, this is where I want to go, he moved back with his family this time and stayed for a few years, came back and went back again for longer. So this has nothing to do with Steichen, but it's just to show you something. So cross-pollination is something that always happens in art. There's nothing wrong. You know, you look at something, it gives you an idea, or you have a friend who's better at something, so you say, hey, can you help me with this? This is a upper coat that was made for Paul Poiret's wife by Paul Poiret, Denise. He made it for her for an evening party in 1910. The fabric was designed by Raoul Dufy, a famous photographer, fashion illustrator as well, painter, a little bit of everything. They always did a bit of everything in France. They were not really specific in sticking in one area. So it was not uncommon in France, for example, and this is not a joke, because there are a couple ballets where Picasso did the backdrop and Chanel made the clothes. Quite normal, you know, like the Ballet Russe, for example. So here we go. So in 1911, during one of his visits to France, the publication Art et Décoration, which was a very popular magazine, commissioned him to do a fashion shoot. And it was, in essence, the first official modern shoot where he came up with everything himself. Like he chose the girl, he had the clothes. He said, okay, you're going to go down the stairs. You're going to stand there. I'm going to do the thing. Everything was done the way now we think of a photo shoot, minus 25 assistants. So, yeah, because there was a lot. So the relationship between the American photographer and Paul Poiret became very, very beneficial, because Paul Poiret was really the most creative at the point. One of 2 or 3 couturiers that was really changing everything overnight. So everyone always says that Chanel freed the woman from the corset. Well, 1905, 1906, Poiret was doing outfits with no corsets. He was there before her, and he was not the only one. You know, it was already changing. Only the super rich would have done it. The more established would have kept the corset for a little longer, and then, you know, things evolve slowly. So the photo shoot for Art et Décoration for Paul Poiret changed everything. So most illustration in fashion magazines were fashion illustrations. The French were very big on pochoir. Everyone did stamps. So you would have things by, for example, Georges Le Pape was very famous. There was Barbier. There were a couple other ones. And those men were being paid a very, very substantial salary. So it was really just the type of exposure people wanted. So the color is fake. It was hand painted afterwards, but this is one of the photos that Steichen did for the photo shoot in 1911. So he mentioned to friends that it was the first serious fashion photographs he ever made. These are other ones from the shoot. All this is from the same collection. So as you can see, the clothing is also very modern, very fantasist. And Paul Poiret was really like the toast of the town. So this is slightly different. So it's back on the cross-pollination. I want you to keep in mind that this is a dress that Paul Poiret made for his wife, because she was his muse. The little skirt is removable. So it's tulle with rhinestone. The dress is very simple. It's basically like wearing a t-shirt, but it's all in damask. It's a spectacular thing. It was purchased at an auction. The wardrobe went for auction and the Met bought a big chunk of it. For some odd reason, the French didn't want to keep it, so it was very odd. But there was you must have heard of Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring, 1913. And what you may not realize is on April 1st, when it was shown, the dancing was extremely flat and very square-ish, Native American Indian type thing, with boom, boom, boom going in, not classic 19th century music. Some people in the audience were like, what is this? Started being, no, but this is not a joke. If you go online tonight, go on YouTube and try to find, you have the date, they are filming of people beating each other up at the ballet. Meanwhile, Monsieur Poiret and his wife are there watching it, and the dress witnessed it. That's why I wanted to put it in. And if you look at the Rite of Spring, it's technically a Cubist ballet. You know, the movements are very angular. It's a very different thing. So you see, Cubism is also not just in painting, it can be also in movement. So now we're going to go through the fun plot. Okay, here we go. So Steichen and fashion, and really technically, three words that always come up with Steichen: it's beautiful, it's very glamorous, and it's so elegant. Like it really is just beautiful. So here we go. So this is Monsieur Steichen, 1902, 1917. Anything with the red is what I know is in the collection because it's on the website. So that's why I took it. And this is him when he was at Condé Nast Publications. In 1922, he had a little issue and he decided to burn a lot of his paintings, which is very sad, as he was in France, I think, when it happened. And then he complained to a friend, said, I'm sick of being poor. And in 1923, he gets a job at Condé Nast Publications. So it's Vogue, and it's Mr. Condé Nast himself. So it's Vogue and Vanity Fair. And he also was doing things with an advertising firm for like Jergens, ad campaigns and so forth. So obviously very well paid. So I suspect they may have been like wife number 3 coming this time because, you know, he changed everything. So Steichen is now first and foremost known as a fashion photographer, but he was equally a painter until he decided, no, that's it. 1920s, he's fully into photography. So he was also very keen on channeling what I said, like the beauty and elegance of the fashion world. Like he liked beauty, and he was also very fond of flowers. So sometimes he would photograph a flower the same way you would photograph a beautiful actress. You know, and there's a lot of respect in the subject. So he also always saw photography as a fine art, and he said, like, so is fashion photography. Like he didn't have any hang-ups about it. So it allowed him to actually play with it, and you know, there's always a very nice psychology and taste within each sitter, may it be a flower or an apple or so forth. It's always pretty. So this is the initial, like I was going to say, the wow moment of Steichen. As you know, back in, especially in late 19th century, especially in Saratoga, New York, and so forth, the very rich ladies would dress very beautifully to go to the horse races, and it was a thing. We still, in London, they still do the Derby. You have the Kentucky Derby still, so, you know, we do those kind of things. So in 1907, he went to the Longchamp, which is right outside of Paris, like it's on the door, basically, and he took a photograph of these 3 very wealthy ladies, very well dressed, but the garments happened to be, because they were walking, so they lifted their skirt completely curved, looks like a marble sculpture. Then you have a poor woman next to them, like an average person. And you have a car, and then you have also the carriage with the horses. So you could see there's a little bit of everything. That, in essence, is a fashion photography. It's fashion photography, a very beautiful fashion photo. This is part of their collection. 1935, Montclisco, Lily Pond, very beautiful. But look on top, all the shoes. And you can see also the reflection of the garment. It's, in essence, a fashion photo. And you can see the shoes are very cute, very nice. The water lilies are extremely beautiful. The water is very respectful. It's always pretty and very, very elegant. This woman is just stupendous. I am not familiar with her at all, but that dress is just spectacular. That photo is used to illustrate many, many fashion exhibits. They would always go back to this one because it's 1935, open back, the little bolero collapsing. By looking at it, we know it's silk satin. We know the jewelry is most likely real for the photo, so it's really good stuff. Also, the US, especially New York, huge manufacturer of very high-end jewelry, as good as Paris or London. So they were manufacturing very beautifully, including Newark, which in the 1880s was famous for having a lot of Germans who do the enamel work. So those beautiful little rings with enamel, an amethyst, maybe little seed pearls. That's a very Newark, New Jersey style, which was hired by Tiffany, blah, blah, blah. So you have them around. 1934, he was showing shoes, sandals, artistic, but always very polite, very beautiful. So we're going to go back in time. You know, I think it's quite attractive. It's very beautiful. I mean, anything with the red is on the website, so you know they own it. Marlene Dietrich was known for using her own clothes and her own jewelry during photo shoots. So this is the real thing. Incredibly beautiful, quite small actually. So you can tell she knew how to make herself look much slimmer, much taller than she was. But this is Hollywood Glamour 101. You know, you're dealing, is it a human or God? I'm not sure. But this is exactly what people wanted back then. And also, young girls up to, I would say, the 60s, or late 50s, early 60s, wanted to look like society ladies. Being elegant was very sought after. Nowadays, everyone wants to look like a 16-year-old. It's a very different concept. So, no, it's true. It really is just odd. So, Steichen and Portraiture. So, classic Cynicism and modernity. We're going to go a little faster. Quick thing. A little friend, Pierre Morgan, had commissioned a painter, a German painter, to do his portrait. And the problem is he's very busy, always busy. And so the painter contacted Steichen and he said, you do beautiful portraits, you need to do 2 photos. I'll choose the one I want, you keep the other one. And he's like, okay, so we'll do it. They explained what they wanted, so that the painter could actually had enough sketches and then had the photo so he could go back and not bother him every 2 or 3 weeks to like just have him sit for a day or 2. So if you go to the portrait of that he has at the Morgan Library, there was a Steichen photo behind it. Steichen and flowers. Again, it may as well be a fashion photography, but it is just a plant. He was very fond of plants, and we'll find out later on. So 1920s, he was living in France, was having issues. So Boulangy is about 45 minutes currently from Paris. Back then, it must have been like an hour and a half. He decided to really just go completely in photography. But he also was very much into photographing things around the house and creating little sculptures and things, flowers and so forth, which he called his finger exercises. So he was always playing with it and calibrating things. So he's a very, very interesting man. And fine-tuning his style. So, but also by that time, 1920, you start having better development process and so forth. So it's very, very advanced. So here we go. We're going to go faster. So some of the Hollywood girls. So you will see in the gallery Rudolph Valentino, who dated Paula Negri right before his death. So she completely milked it for a while. It was known as an arrange thing by the studios for PR, and she would only leave at night and look always in black lace. So she was very dramatic and romantic, very, very attractive woman. Actress Anna May Wong, who is actually from Los Angeles proper. One of the first famous Chinese, I would say American Chinese actresses. She had a fairly decent career. I know back then Hollywood was very linear in what they wanted. One of the exercises, what I thought, finger exercise. I'm not sure if this is an egg that you give to a chicken if they don't want to, like when they're not producing eggs, to make them do it, like it's marble, or if it's a broncusi. Because my grandmother had some at home from when she was younger. Like, there was just eggs you would put in the chickens. Like, oh, there's an egg, I'm going to make another one. But I'm not sure. So I think this, and it's called The Beginning of the World. I think it's broncusi, but I'm not sure. I could find anything. So you have the actress Joan Crawford. So now you are full-fledged Condé Nast years publications, and you could see direct influence with filming. You know, very large light. So you have to do dark and light, absorbing, reflecting. So this is why in Hollywood suddenly you had those wonderful dresses in satin or velvet, and then what you would think rhinestone diamonds. Because they couldn't do any other things. Colored stones didn't look good. And there were 3 types of linoleum. If I'm not mistaken, was red, orange, and yellow. One would look black, one would look white, and one would look gray. You know, it was very odd with the black and film. So you could see the influence, and each of the subject is still looking very elegant. There's a psychology behind them. It's a very good product. Another finger exercise. But going back, we're getting full-on cubist at this point. I'm not familiar with Sylvia Sidney, but she's so vulnerable, yet in control, which is interesting. Gary Cooper, Cole Porter mentioned him in a song because he was known for being that beautiful. Like, you have all those references. He was super masculine, almost pretty, very tall. But look at those eyes. He's up to no good. Like, there's something going on. Like, there's humor also as well. So this is one of my favorite, 3 pears and an apple. I mean, it's pretty specific, but you can see, like, also this could look as closely to somebody who has freckles, you know, a study of it. Very beautiful. So now we're going to click, we're almost done. So the Condé Nast years were extremely successful, and it is really the best marriage of art and commerce for him. He is given carte blanche. Condé Nast likes him. So he said, like, you do a beautiful work, just do whatever you want. And he's paid very, very well. The reason magazines were so wealthy back then is you needed them. You needed the newspaper and the magazine in order to make a name for yourself. They controlled the news. So they were super powerful. Think of Mr. Hearst. Like, he put a couple presidents in place because he had the power. So here we go. This is one of the most fascinating pieces. It is 2 models. The one at the bottom is Marion Morehouse. You'll see her, and she's also in the gallery. She was his favorite model, very American, very patrician, very tall for the period. But they're wearing a mask in papier-mâché done by another artist, and this is a fashion shoot for Vogue. Very, very interesting. So you have a little complexity. More fashion. So again, models, background. So you could see how he plays with everything in order to make things. So don't think that these little mirror curvy staircase are a Chanel thing. Everyone was doing it. It was a very 1920s, 30s thing going, like late 20s, early 30s. You see them everywhere. But you can see late 20s, 1927 to 1936, best fashion. Like, you could wear this stuff today. Like, really, really beautiful. And as you can see, chiffon, moiré, little suits. It's stunning, stunning. This is Marion Morehouse, this American model. He also designed the piano. So he was also all over. Talk about a little bit all over for the control. But beautiful, the lighting, this is direct lighting from Hollywood. You could see, and then you redo it in a studio and so forth. All the reflection, very cubist again. I was mentioning people here. I saw the photos, and then I was not familiar with Vidamour as a shoe manufacturer, but if you listen to it phonetically, in French, it means life of love. So it's completely like it was a fake name. It was not a person, you know, but it's beautiful clothes. And I mean, as you can see, like you're not sure if he's promoting the dress, the bracelet, or the shoe. You have a little bit of everything. The compositions are very well worked. So it is, again, the background in painting. He was very much into compositions. Dinazard, famous as well. So this is a Paul Poiret dress. And because of the simplicity of it, he put it in front of a backdrop to emphasize the dress. I mean, you could wear this today. I mean, it's really not particularly shocking. Marion Morehouse again, Marion Morehouse, and no one to this day remembers who this poor lady is, which is sad because she's right in front of us, but we don't know, like we have no idea. All the dresses are by Madeleine Vionnet, who was a genius, like really just the best. And if you look at Marion Morehouse's top, it's actually ermine fur. But because it's done in little stripped, it now acts as if it's cut in the bias. Oh yeah, it was very advanced. Flowers, again, we're going back. It's as elegant as beautiful. So this is a lotus from Anquisco, 1915. So you could see there's a good 15 years in between the two photographs we just saw. 1928, woman on a yacht. You can see the texture of the fabrics, the leather, atmospheric in the back. I mean, this should be an ad campaign for Ralph Lauren at this point. This is just incredibly attractive. And all the ladies are just very beautiful. I'm not sure if the second woman from me is Lee Miller. She might be, because I know she was a model and also she became a photographer. She was also incredibly attractive. So this is to show you how so modern it was. Dixie for Woodbury soap. And people have already said, this is Matisse. I'm like, yeah, very likely, you know, like the decoupage, very much. And Jergens, again, this could be another ad campaign. You just change the thing. It's still quite beautiful. So this is when, the 1920s and 30s is when he made all of his money, and he was very relaxed about it. So we're finishing. So Curator. He was a very interesting man. He had already had a relationship with MoMA because of the war effort. You know, he showed some things before, but he had already done stuff. In 1936, he did a small exhibit about delphinium flowers. He was part of the Delphinium Society of America and developed one species, actually, an hybrid. And I thought the photos, the exhibit initially was just photographs. And no, they were actually bouquets of very rare delphiniums, which now you would never do in a museum. It's a big no-no. But look at the size of those things. I mean, they're huge, the size of people. Once he retired from Condé Nast publications, he did a photo spread about flowers, beautiful gardens for Life magazine. These are the photos he took. He had a thing for flowers. That was his thing. And for 1937, it could look 1950s or 60s. You know, it's very, very modern. So Steichen forged a relationship with MoMA in the 1930s initially, but, and then continued to be a curator, designer, arranger. Arranger is when you move things around just to make them a little nicer. And competition judge until 1962 when he kind of like gave up. He's like, I'm old, I'm going home. But from 47 to 62, he was the curator of photography. And what was fascinating, he did not forget where he came from. Some of the exhibits, okay, first of all, some of the first one he did was for the military. So you have battle photographs, one from the photo secession. So all the people who were shown in the little book, he brought back. He had another exhibit about lost American photographers from the 19th century. He was very pushing. He said, bring back anyone who was ignored, and now we have to put them in a division. So he was a very, very great curator in that sense that he was very human. So forgotten photographers, the one from 1951. And you could see you have a little bit of everything, things from 19th century, turn of the century, and so forth. Play of perspective, and so forth. So The Family Man was an exhibit that he did for MoMA, who is to this day the most successful photograph exhibit ever done for a very simple reason. He had about 500 photos, 273 photographers from 68 different countries. They had to sign a release form. He could do whatever he wanted with the photo. He could shrink it, crop it, enlarge it. They had no say. And they were like, yeah, sure, do it, do it. Well, it worked out so well that you had people like Robert Capa, who's in New York, obviously started the International Center of Photography. No, it was his brother, started the International Center of Photography. The ICP, Henri Cartier-Bresson, which was a friend from Paris, Feininger, and so forth. So the Family of Man opened on the 24th of January and until May 55, toured for 8 years, went 37 countries, 6 continents, 9 million people in attendance. It has never been surpassed. So now you can see what he did. Very, very modern. If you've ever been to the UN for some of the exhibit, they still do them in that style, in that little gallery. They do panels and they just stick them around. So this is the last one. Sorry, I went a little over time and then we're going to go over there. So this is taken a quote. I shall use the camera as long as I live, for I can say things that cannot be said with any other medium. So it's fashion photography, fashion journalism, still life, everything is morphed, and it is also a very strong, as you can say, painterly quality in the compositions and so forth. So this is just high-end photography, which is now considered in museum something to be shown.